Good afternoon, paramedics. It's 1:30 on Monday, and so what correspondence have I had this week? I think mostly it breaks down into Lindsay, Steve, and Andy. Um, the the and I know that was split between the discussion board and email. So thank you for those of you who sent me something. I noticed that everybody's logged in this week, which is great. Apart from one, has anybody seen Andy Wood? I don't know whether you know Andy, but I really need to contact him because I'm worried now. But but anyway, Lindsay makes a great point there on the discussion board. But she says that she finds it difficult sometimes to judge capacity in another person, because you don't, there you are showing up to a situation where you don't know anybody. So I mean, sometimes it is hard to understand whether somebody's kind of all there, really. Then that might be their normal state. You're not to know. And then throw in alcohol into the equation, and people act in ways which their best friends wouldn't recognise under the influence of a few, and then drugs even more so. You got to parse out what drugs they've had and what that's doing to their capacity to think straight. Yeah, absolutely. And she says that psychologists and psychiatrists have difficulty defining what is capacity. And I've said back to her that I have no doubt whatsoever that there are philosophers who've got their PhDs musing over this particular point and spending years developing ideas around and dilemmas in this. And what do you face? You've got to jump out of the ambulance and go and do something about it, because it's in law, it's in statute even. Tremendously difficult. Steve, I'm gonna just for 1 second here fiddle with me machine. I'm going over to the discussion board. Steve put a fair chunk in this week, so I want to pay attention to was it mental capacity? I think so. I think it was mental capacity. I'm sorry about this. I meant to have this all up and running, but I haven't. Steve gives us a rather lengthy reply. He's don't apologise because it's late, Steve. I do understand what goes on, and you've got a lot to juggle. But so is practice morally straightforward or tricky? If you remember, these are some of the questions that I asked in the first week, and what he seems to argue in his entry on Blackboard is that your job is a mixture of pretty straightforward stuff where you've got rules and you've got guidelines and you've got protocols to go by, and other areas where it really is tricky. Starting CPR on a patient without a do not resuscitate order. And that's the traditional breakdown that people put, isn't it? That the clinical practice is a sort of combination of intensely boring most of the time, 90% of the time, and then extremely exciting, too exciting, fearfully exciting for the 5% of the time, or 10% of the time, whatever it was. But on the other hand, when it does occur, when you do get these difficult situations, they are grand scale difficulties that you face. Is it getting trickier, or is it getting simpler to work in clinical practice? And what Steve draws what draws my attention to is the fact that, things are getting more complicated for you fellas out there now. Once upon a time, as he says, when it was a traditional ambulance sort of, approach, it was get a group of very sick people to hospital in the shortest amount of time, scoop and run. And now, you've got to, you people have got to be thinking on your feet in practice, and you've always got litigation breathing down your neck. Now, again, I want to come back to the point that I've made a couple of weeks on the run now. My guess is that, my guess is that you don't know many people who, as in the course of their work, have ended up at the wrong end of litigation. And I mean litigation now. I'm not talking about being dragged into the office or been dragged in front of the Health Professions Council. In some respects, I think the Health Professions Council is more fearful than litigation. But my guess is that not many of you know someone who's actually ended up in court in the dock as a result of things which have happened at work. But on the other hand, I mean, that's the legal side. On the moral side, on the other hand, the more that you are called upon to make decisions in your day-to-day practice, the more that this is going to be the case, that you find it almost impossible to proceed through your working day without engaging in some type of moral dilemma and moral difficulty. Legal difficulties. I asked you, is the legal aspect of your work getting more difficult or less difficult? And it's true that the weight of litigation is felt more keenly, I think, by healthcare professionals than ever. Now, sometimes I think that that's an exaggerated fear, but as you point out here, that the whole organisations can end up in difficulty with regard to legal considerations, and you point to the North Staff's situation. And the thing that bothers me, one of the many things that bothers me about the North Staff situation, is that for everything that went on there, and so far as we know, what went wrong originated at the top of the organisation and spread down, that the only people who've really ended up on the sharp end of the smelly stick are two frontline nurses who've been struck off. Now I can say all I want about your fear of litigation and fear of retribution being rather exaggerated, because won't know one. But when things really do get bad, it's often a situation whereby junior heads will roll, and therefore the frontline operative has every reason to be fearful, because if the organisation is at risk, often offering somebody as a sacrificial lamb is the way of getting rid of the sins of the whole organisation. Lastly, Steve says that that one of the reasons why he's doing this educational pathway is precisely to help him with these sorts of difficult dilemmas, and the fact is that you will not be able to go on a module anymore anywhere without being forced to study something to do with ethics, because ethics gives people the sort of ideological capacity to represent their own views in a coherent and a logical way, and I'm glad to see that the paramedic services are engaging with this. It struck me as completely significant that it should be ethics, which is a core module on this first engagement which many of you had with higher education. Lastly, the last thing that I want to talk about while I'm on is a story from Andy, the other Andy. I'm going to read it out because a story circulating at the moment in the mess room. Somewhere in the country, a man has a cardiac arrest in the street. An off-duty paramedic sees what's happening and goes to help start CPR. Eventually, they get the chap going again, but he is never going to do the Financial Times crossword again. Andy used a different expression, but I'm not going to use it. The family are now suing the paramedic for the expenses because keeping their loved one alive is far more expensive than if he was dead. Okay. His employers would not indemnify him as he was not on duty, and the union do not cover you either. The validity of the story is unsure, but nothing would surprise me. Now, this, to me, has all of the hallmarks of what we call urban myths. This is like the fella who goes to a rave, meets some girl, doesn't go home for 3 days, gets picked up by his friends, dishevelled and confused, and asks his friend how come he's got this scar on his back, and it turns out he's had his kidneys nicked. It's got all that sort of... Okay, let's go through it stage by stage. First of all, is there a duty on a paramedic? Is there a legal duty on a paramedic to go and help a person in the street who's had a cardiac arrest? No. There is no duty on a paramedic to do that. On the other hand, there is no legal duty on a paramedic to do that. But if I saw you and I knew you were a paramedic, and I saw you walk past someone having a cardiac arrest, although you couldn't be accused of negligence for walking past, I would report you to the Health Professions Council on the grounds that this was unprofessional conduct. Not illegal conduct, but unprofessional conduct and unethical conduct. And I think that they would take a very dim view of a practitioner who just walked past someone who was having a cardiac arrest in the street. Okay? Now, if the family wanted to take the paramedic to court to sue them, what would they be suing that paramedic for? Would it be negligence, in which case they'd have to show all of the 4 stages that we're talking about before, and the court would have to decide, in those circumstances, given those conditions in the street, could this paramedic be expected to perform any better than any other paramedic? Or, to be more precise, was the CPR offered by this paramedic at the drop of a hat in the street materially less high in quality than that of a reasonable other paramedic? If the answer to that question is not yes, then they haven't even got a case in negligence. The negligence case wouldn't even stand up. Let's suppose that they did manage to establish that you didn't do CPR as good as what you would expect a reasonable paramedic to do. Even then, the court are faced with a paramedic who, out of the goodness of his heart, has done his best. And, you know, there's people passing by, there's the bus pulling up in the street and all the rest of it. Do you think a court would be likely to go with the complainant versus the paramedic? I can never see a situation where that would happen. I can never see it. Keeping their loved one alive is now far more expensive. Far more expensive than whom? If this person had a brain injury and could no longer be looked after at home, they'd be looked after by the National Health Service. My guess is that this story is American in origin, because the expense of looking after someone with a brain injury, frankly, it doesn't whatever else you've got to deal with in our country, it's not often the expense. So I think that this is a modern urban myth, to be honest with you. So nice one for bringing it forward, Andy, and a good point to, it's like a university seminar in how to analyse legally a problem. But I'd scotch you in the mess room. If I was you, Andy, I would look at the person who's telling you and go, not having that. But there you are, that's just me. So if I don't hear from you before, I shall hear from you during the week sometime. Keep your eye out for Andy, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Bye now.